Hello, students. Welcome to the online class once more. Do you remember where we stopped last time? Yes, we stopped there where we found that Bruno was about to be taken to the zoo at Mysore. The curator of the zoo had sent a cage in a lorry for Bruno. Now let us go to the next paragraph. We all missed him greatly, but in a sense we were relieved. My wife was inconsolable. She wept and fretted. For the first few days she would not eat a thing. Then she wrote a number of letters to the curator. How was Baba? Back came the replies. Well, but fretting. He refuses food too. After that, friends visiting Mysore were begged to make a point of going to the zoo and seeing how Baba was getting along. They reported that he was well but looked very thin and sad. All the keepers at the zoo said he was fretting. For 3 months I managed to restrain my wife from visiting Mysore. Then she said one day, I must see Baba. Either you take me by car or I will go myself by bus or train. So I took her by car. Explanation. After Bruno had been sent to the zoo at Mysore, the writer and his family members were very sad. They missed Bruno a lot. The writer says that his wife could not be consoled. Students, here it's written she was inconsolable. That means she could not be made understood. And she kept weeping and remained worried about Bruno. She stopped taking food for some days, and at last she wrote a letter to the curator asking about how Bruno was. And the reply came that he was well, but he refused to take food. Students, that was really serious. Bruno had been refusing to take food, and that made the wife of the writer very moved. The writer's wife started begging or requesting anyone who would go to Mysore to visit the zoo and see whether Bruno was doing well. And she was reported by those visitors that Bruno was well, but he looked very thin and sad. When asked, the innkeepers also said that Bruno remained very worried about something that was not understandable to them. This news made the writer's wife very much disturbed, and she was worried to visit the zoo badly. The writer stopped her from going to the zoo for near about 3 months, But it was now impossible for him to stop her. One day, the writer's wife told him that if he won't be able to take her to the zoo by car, she would herself go by bus or by train. And so the writer had to decide that he would have to take her to the zoo, and he decided to take her by car. Next paragraph. Friends had conjectured that the bear would not recognize her. I had thought so too, but while she was yet some yards from his cage, Baba saw her and recognized her. He howled with happiness. She ran up to him, patted him through the bars, and he stood on his head in delight. For the next 3 hours, she would not leave that cage. She gave him tea, lemonade, cakes, ice cream, and whatnot. Then closing time came, and we had to leave. My wife cried bitterly. Baba cried bitterly. Even the hardened curator and the keepers felt depressed. As for me, I had reconciled myself to what I knew was going to happen next. Oh, please, sir, she asked the curator, may I have my Baba back? Hesitantly he answered, Madam, he belongs to the Jew and is government property now. I cannot give away government property. But if my boss, the superintendent at Bangalore, agrees, certainly you may have him back. Explanation. So it was a very hard time and, of course, a very interesting one as well. Friends of the writer and his wife told them that it would be difficult for the bear, that is Bruno, to recognize her, that means the writer's wife. But very surprisingly, something went in a different way. When the wife of the writer went into the Jew and she was some yards away from Bruno, Bruno could immediately recognize her. He was very happy to see her, and she also ran towards him. She patted him, that means Bruno, on his back through the bars, and they stood for some time exchanging their feelings. The writer's wife had been with Bruno for 3 hours. In these 3 hours, she gave Bruno many things to eat and drink, and those were tea, lemonade, cakes, and ice cream. When it was the time to go away from Bruno, it was very difficult for her. Both Bruno and the writer's wife cried bitterly. It made even the curator and the keepers sad and depressed. But the writer reconciled himself. Reconciled himself means he tried to make himself understand the whole matter because it was a very emotional matter. And he also knew what would happen next. And it happened exactly in that way. The writer's wife went to the curator and asked her if she could take Bruno back to her home. To this, the curator said that he could not give Bruno back because it was now the property of the Jew and the government. However, he told the writer's wife that something could be done if the boss, that is, the superintendent of the Jew, would consider the matter in a different way. Next paragraph. There followed the return journey to Bangalore and a visit to the superintendent's bungalow. A tearful pleading. Baba and I are both fretting for each other. Will you please give him back to me? He was a kind hearted man and consented. Not only that, but he wrote to the curator telling him to lend us a cage for transporting the bear to Bangalore. Back we went to Mysore again, armed with the superintendent's letter. Baba was driven into a small cage and hoisted on the top of the car. The cage was tied securely, and a slow and careful return journey to Bangalore was accomplished. Explanation. After that, both the writer and his wife went back to Bangalore and visited the superintendent's residence. There they talked a lot, and the wife of the writer pleaded. Students, pleaded means requested the superintendent to allow her to take back Bruno home. And the superintendent was a very kind hearted person. He agreed and wrote to the curator of the Jew to help them out in taking Bruno back to their own house. He wrote to provide a cage for transporting Bruno back. That was a very good result, and the writer and his wife again moved towards Mysore to take Bruno home. Bruno was driven into the small cage, and the cage was very securely tied onto the roof of the car. They drove very slowly and finally reached home. Next paragraph. Once home, a squad of coolies were engaged for special work in our compound. An island was made for Baba. It was 20 feet long and 15 feet wide and was surrounded by a dry pit or moat, 6 feet wide and 7 feet deep. A wooden box that once housed fowls was brought and put on the island for Baba to sleep in at night. Straw was placed inside to keep him warm and his baby, the gnarled stump along with his gun, the piece of bamboo, both of which had been sentimentally preserved since he had been sent away to the Jew, were put back for him to play with. Explanation. In this paragraph, we find that a lot of preparation had been done for Bruno to continue his life at home. Some coolies, that is, some working persons, were called and told to make a compound for Bruno. In the compound, there would be a small island of near about 20 feet long and 15 feet wide, and that would be surrounded by a dry pit. Dry pit here means a pit that is not filled with water. Generally, we find that a pit is filled with water for birds and some other animals. But this was not so. Moat, M-O-A-T, moat. Moat means also a ditch filled with water, but here it was not filled with water. A wooden box was brought, which once served as the house for some fowls, that means some birds, and now it would become the same for Bruno. That is, Bruno would live there. In fact, it would sleep inside the box at night, and during daytime, Bruno would be left free to move around in that island. The box was stuffed with straw on the floor so that it would provide warmth to Bruno. And the playing things when he was a baby were also brought and kept there. When Bruno was sent to the Jew, these playing things were kept very carefully as sentiments and emotions were attached to them. Those things were a piece of bamboo that Bruno considered as the gun and other things. Next paragraph. In a few days, the coolies hoisted the cage onto the island and Baba was released. He was delighted. Standing on his hind legs, he pointed his gun and cradled his baby. My wife spent hours sitting on a chair there while he sat on her lap. He was 15 months old and pretty heavy too. Explanation. In these paragraphs, students, the final stage of Bruno's new house has been described. Now Bruno's island house was ready and he was released from the cage. And he was very happy to find his old things. He would spend hours sitting with the writer's wife. Sometimes he also tried to sit on her lap. But now Bruno grew bigger. He was of 15 months old and he was heavy also. So we find that Bruno again was brought back and given his own house on the artificial island. Students, we have come to the last paragraph now. Let me read out that, and after that, we will come to the end of the story. The way my wife reaches the island and lives it is interesting. I have tied a rope to the overhanging branch of a mango tree with a loop at its end. Putting one foot in the loop, she kicks off with the other to the bridge the 6-foot gap that constitutes the width of the surrounding pit. The return journey is made the same way, but who can say now that a sloth bear has no sense of affection, no memory, no individual characteristics? Explanation. So, students, we find that Bruno was continuing his life on the artificial island. In the last paragraph, the writer describes how his wife used to go to that island. To cross the dry pit, a rope was tied to one of the branches of a mango tree. There was a loop made at one end of the rope, and the writer's wife would put her foot into the loop and kick herself against the pitch that would drive her to the island. In that way, she would go to the island and meet Bruno. In the same way, she would also come back. Students, it is very important to understand that the island was made in that way so that Bruno won't be able to come out of it because it was growing bigger and bigger. Towards the end of the story, the writer makes some important questions. He says that who would say that animals do not understand human feelings? It was proven by Bruno that even an animal like bear would understand human feelings, and Bruno had proven it. So, students, we come to the end of this beautiful story that shows the relationship between human beings and animals. We can make any animal our friend. So, let us wind up for today. We will be meeting again in our next class. Till then, bye.